thank you all for coming. I know it is, late afternoon your time. It's 7 my time, and I know that probably been on Zoom all day. I want to thank you for tuning in, and hopefully you can kind of take something away from this presentation. I've done this presentation in a few formats before. I definitely spruced it up for all of you. And one of the things that I really hope to accomplish through this presentation is just to take kind of a high level overview to the admissions process and then break it apart. Break apart some of the different parts of the process, some of the different parts of the application, ways you can engage with colleges, and just give you my tips. Here's what you should be doing. And truthfully, some of those tips might seem obvious, some of them might seem like duh, but I do think it's important for me to say them because I also think that there is a lot out there about the college process that we hear and people talk about and we see in TV or see in the movies that you kind of don't know if it's true or not. And so, I also just think this is important to just share, here are the things that are important. Here are some things that you can do. Here's ways to think about this process. And hopefully you can kind of apply some of it to your own college process. So these are some of the things I'm going to talk about. I'll talk a little bit about academics and how they're used in the process. I'll talk a little bit about standardized testing, the activity section of the application, the essay, then those supplemental and optional essays that some schools have. So just the different components of the application. There's also an additional information section in the application, when you should use that. And then we'll end just talking about how to engage in the admissions process, how to engage with admissions offices, when should you reach out, what are ways to do that, and how should you approach conversations or presentations that you might be able to attend. So we're covering a lot. We're going to take, though, again, that high level overview of all of these different areas. So we'll start off, general tips. And I say these may seem obvious because they might. You're going to be like, yeah, of course I'm going to do that. But again, I think worth saying, reminding you that these things are important in the college process. So the first thing is start early. I really, really do mean this. And, for those of you who are here today, you're already doing that, right? You're already thinking about college. You're not waiting until the day before a deadline to start thinking about it. But it is super important. It's a process. It's not just something you sit down at your computer and do one day. Today I'm going to apply to college. But it takes, planning and organization and it takes time. So the earlier you start, the more prepared you will feel. Be authentic. I think in a lot of ways, people always ask me, what can I do to improve my application? What do you look for in an application? And my answer is always authenticity. Being genuine, being yourself, telling us who you are, what you stand for, how you've spent your time, what you love to do. All of that is so, so, so important. Admissions offices never read an application and think, oh, I'm looking for a student that has done this, this, and this, and then they can be admitted. There's not really a formula like that, especially at selective schools, when most of the students that apply to selective colleges could be admitted. I would say if we were to look at NYU and just look at academics alone, probably 85 to 90% of the students could be academically successful at a school like NYU. And so it's all of these other qualities in the application, from your essay to your activities, where we get to learn about you and learn who you are. And those are the factors that make us want to have you on our campuses. So don't worry about fitting a mold. Don't worry about, being part of a formula. Just be you. And a college that is a good fit for you will absolutely see that. And if a college, doesn't admit you, that means it wasn't the right fit. I truly believe that. So think about who you are, what you stand for, and use that authenticity to put together your college application. Quality over quantity. This is a big one. I think right now, as hard as being in the middle of a global pandemic is, and this hard as 2020 has been, I think it is actually forcing everyone to kind of take a step back from the college process and examine it, because it can't continue the way it was. Schools have had to switch to virtual visits, and schools have had to rethink their admissions processes, since standardized testing isn't super available. And so, I think we're at this point where we're really realizing that the process so far has been so focused on quantity. How many AP classes did you take? How many activities did you do? How many schools are you applying to? How many times did you take the SAT, right? And that's really not what the process is about. The process is about putting together a quality application. You know, it's not about sending 10 letters of recommendation. It's about sending two from people that really know you and can really speak to your character and who you are. And so as you're thinking about the application, remember, it's always about the quality over the quantity. I'd rather read one really good essay than for you to include two half-written essays in your application, or look at, you know, 3 quality extracurricular activities instead of 10 that you've only done here and there for a few years. So definitely think about that. Think about the quality of the application. More isn't better when it comes to applying to colleges. I kind of said this before, but these last 2 points, they kind of go hand in hand. This isn't a process that will be completed in one day. It takes planning, it takes thought, it takes a little bit of self-reflection. You got to think about, what am I looking for? What types of schools am I applying to? Where do I want to be in the country? What campus environment is a good fit for me? And that takes some self-reflection, then researching those schools, putting together your list, putting that application together, learning about all of the different dates and deadlines. And so know that this is going to take time. This is going to be a long-term project that you're going to work on. And so in approaching that long-term project, you want to be organized. And this is a great time to figure out, if you don't already know, what you need to do to be organized. Are you someone that likes spreadsheets? Are you someone that prefers a physical journal to write things down in? You want to use a Google Doc, notes app on your phone, right? What is it that keeps you on track and keeps you organized? And trust me, those skills that you learn to be organized in the college process are going to help you once you get to college as well. You'll have many long-term projects in college. I'm sure you already do now, reading assignments and essays and ways that you have to organize yourself and prepare. And so developing those skills and really learning how you organize best is super important. I'm like a write stuff down person. I don't know if you can see this. I have my little notebook by me all the time. I have different sections of it with my to-do list, and then a note section. And then, each day I map out what I'm going to do. And that's what keeps me organized. I know, but some of my colleagues prefer Excel docs, and they're in Excel and they have everything mapped out. So, it's a good time to play around with it, and I definitely recommend it. So let's talk about the academic section. I think that when it comes to the academic review, the first thing that I always recommend to students is, as you're thinking about your classes, as you're thinking about what classes to take, it is never about, this comes back to the quality over quantity, it's never about taking the most amount of honors classes or the most amount of AP classes. It's about finding that balance, taking challenging classes in areas where you feel like you can excel. Maybe you are a science person and you want to take advantage of the advanced science classes at your school, but you're not so much of an English person. And so you're not going to take AP English because it's really just not your strength. So you're taking advanced science classes, you're balancing that with maybe a regular English course. But at the end of the day, you've developed a schedule that you can do well in because you're playing on your strengths, you're finding the balance. It's not just about taking everything that you can at the hardest level. It's about finding that balance of, classes that you can do well in and classes that challenge you. The students that find that balance are the most successful in our application process because they tend to be the students with the highest grades who have still challenged themselves because they have found that special point that allows them to get good grades and also have that rigor in their curriculum. And so that's super important. And use your classes to play on those strengths. If there's a subject you love, challenge yourself, exhaust that subject. We love to see that. I think there's kind of a myth that a student has to be like super well-rounded. I don't believe that. I think you can have things you love to do and do them really well, and that's super compelling for a college to see. So don't be afraid to play on your strengths as you're choosing your classes. Really think about what you love to do and challenge yourself. Also know that any school that looks at your transcript is not just saying, oh, yep, it's a 4.2 GPA. Actually, most colleges rarely even look at the GPA. We are much more interested in looking at the classes you've taken, where you've taken maybe the higher level class, the more rigorous class, how you found that balance, how you've structured your schedule. And then we look at that in the context of your high school, based on what your high school offers. Does your high school, maybe they don't offer AP classes. Maybe your high school has an IB diploma program that you're taking. Maybe your high school only has honors classes. And so know that, you know, we're not just expecting everyone to look the same. We are looking for you to challenge yourself based on the context that you're coming from, based on your, you know, high school and what your high school has to offer. So we spend a lot of time getting to know your schools and then looking to see how you've taken advantage of what is offered at your schools. Also know rarely will there be kind of minimums. Like rarely is a selective college going to say, yes, you need to have at least a 3.9 GPA to be admitted. It just doesn't really work that way. It really is much more of that, looking for balance, looking at context, looking to see what your strengths are, and looking to see how that plays out in the classroom. A student with a 4.2 could be denied from NYU, and a student with a 3.8 could be admitted. There's just so many factors that we consider. So that's why we really don't have minimums, because it's not just about the GPA. It's about so much more, and it's about the rigor and the balance and the strength of your schedule. So know that it's not just like that bottom line number. There's so much more that we consider. Testing. So, you know, I'm coming at you talking about testing in a time where testing is pretty much not accessible. And so I recognize that. And, you know, I'm going to talk about testing in an ideal world, and then I'll talk about testing, especially for those of you who are really in the midst of it right now. You know, in an ideal world, when, you know, things are open and students can take exams, it really is about figuring out what test is best for you. And for most students, that's either the SAT or the ACT. I think that, you know, I typically recommend that students, if they're not sure which one, you know, is best for them, take both. And then whatever one you kind of feel like you did better on, take that one more time and then be done with it. You know, then you're done. You don't need to overtest. The data shows that once you take a test over 2 times, your score does not go up enough to make a difference in an admission process. So, you know, if you want to take both the SAT and the ACT, great, to see which one you kind of, I don't want to say like more, because it's hard to like taking a standardized test, but, you know, if you want to decide which one resonates more with you, and then take that one more time and be done with it. I do not recommend over testing. It is not worth anyone's time. And again, the data shows it is not even worth it. I will say too, as you're thinking about taking the SAT and the ACT, know that there are just, with the College Board and ACT, many fee waiver options. I know that, you know, the college application process can get a little bit pricey, so definitely look into those options as well if you feel like your family would qualify for them. Most schools are also flexible with sending SAT and ACT scores, and then, you know, the College Board will accept fee waivers. Many schools will accept scores from counselors if you've exhausted fee waivers. So don't forget about that piece either, because I know that it can kind of add up. Most schools will also super score your exams. And so super scoring means, let's say you took the SAT twice, and the first time you got a higher score on the critical reading, and then the second time you got a higher score on the math. Most schools will take that highest critical reading score, the highest math score, and combine them together to make your new SAT super score, and that is the score they will consider in their admission process. Many schools are also starting to do this with the ACT. So we will take all of your different subsections. Maybe you've taken the ACT twice. We'll take your highest subsections, recalculate a new high kind of composite score, total score for you, and use that in our review process. So if you do take an exam more than once, we will pull out your highest scores. So that sometimes can really benefit students in the process. Then we kind of come to this idea of schools that are test optional, and then there is also a few schools that are test blind. Actually, the UC system is involved in a very interesting conversation with the law about test blind admissions. So I imagine more will come out about this, especially as it relates to the UC system in the next year or so. But right now, most schools are test optional because schools are just recognizing that testing is not accessible. Students cannot take tests. Tests keep getting canceled. So most schools for this year, at the very least, have said you don't need to send testing. Totally fine. We will review your application without testing. And what that really means is schools will be more considering your high school transcript is kind of the main part of that academic review. So instead of having the high school's transcript and testing, they will just use the high school transcript. And, we're expecting NYU, like most schools has gone test optional this year, we're expecting that over half of the students that apply will be applying test optional. Testing is just not available, and we get it. So we are trying to kind of adjust to the times that we're in. Now, there have always been schools that have been test optional. There have been schools that have been test optional for years and years and years. And so for some students that maybe just, don't feel like they test well or really don't want testing to be a part of their process, they might look into these schools. Let's say I think when all is said and done, more schools will remain test optional, but I guess that's yet to be seen. But there are still many schools that have been test optional and will continue to be test optional. There are even some very selective schools, U Chicago, GW, that have been test optional for quite a few years. Test optional means that if you submit testing, it will be considered in the process, but you don't have to submit it. So if you don't submit it, that's okay. Your application will be reviewed without it, but if you do submit it, it will be used in the process to review your application. Test blind means testing will not be considered at all. Don't need to submit it. Even if you submit it, it will not be reviewed. Testing is just no longer a part of that school's testing, application process. And so that's kind of the subtle difference. Neither one obviously requires testing, whereas, test blind is basically saying, we're not going to look at it at all, whereas test optional is saying, if you send it, we're going to look at it. And so good to ask schools that you're applying to what they are. I think most private universities are along the lines of test optional. We allow students that option to submit it if they would like, but they don't have to if they don't want to. And to be seen how that, plays out moving forward, but that's kind of the difference between the two. So that's the academic piece, that's the testing piece. Those are kind of the parts of the application that we would say kind of fulfill the academic review for most colleges. But like I said before, the academic review, it's really just one small part of the application. It's always academics in conjunction with all of the personal qualities you present to an admissions committee, because academics alone aren't enough for us to choose our class, because like I said, most students can do the work. It's about who's a good fit personally for our campuses, along with who can do the work. So I'm going to kind of use the format of the Common Application to show some examples, but I think a lot of these examples could be applicable for most applications. I'm just going to show you in the format of the Common App. I think most of you might be familiar with the Common App, but if you're not, it is an application that over 900 colleges around the country use. So basically you fill out one application, make a list of the colleges you're applying to. So let's say you decide to apply to NYU and you apply to 4 other schools that are all on the Common Application. You hit submit, and that one application goes to all of those schools. Now, some of those schools might also have like supplemental essays that only get sent to that school, but the general bulk of the Common App is just filled out once. It can go to multiple schools. And like I said, 900 schools use it. So if you're applying to a bunch of schools that utilize the Common App, that's how you should be submitting your application. Don't fill out their individual applications if you can avoid it. And that is for sure. Many schools are also Common Application exclusive. It's the only application that they use. NYU is one of those schools, trying to make it as simple as possible, but great to research once you kind of have your college list who uses what application, so that you can kind of do the least amount of busy work possible. So the activities section, and the Common App calls it the activities section. Some other applications might call it extracurricular activities, but this is essentially a chance for you to show us how you spend your time outside of the classroom. So here's some pieces of advice. Explain everything that needs to be explained. And that might seem, kind of redundant, but if you have a club at your school that is just called Project Interact and you write President, Project Interact, don't assume that the person reading your application knows what Project Interact is. Maybe it is a leadership organization where you've gotten to attend leadership conferences all over the world. Maybe it's a community service organization. We don't know. So don't assume that the person reading your application would understand what that was. Make sure you explain it. Give yourself credit for what you're doing. Make sure we know how you're spending your time. And that goes along with acronyms too. You want to make sure you don't just say, yep, part of SGA. And we're, what is SGA? We open an application and we think, what is that? Student Government Association? Probably. It's probably. So make sure you spell everything out. Assume that the person reading your application does not know what is coming through, does not know your school, and definitely explain everything. Also, don't think that your activities just have to be school clubs. I find students fall into this trap really frequently, and I love to hear other things that you do. Maybe you have a job. A job is certainly something I would include as an activity. There's commitment there. There's responsibility that's shown through that. Many people have, family responsibilities, taking care of a younger brother or sister, taking them to school in the morning, helping them with homework. There's a lot to be said for a responsibility that you have in your family that you do daily or weekly. So definitely think outside of the box. It doesn't just have to be a school club. It could be involvement in a church or a synagogue or a religious organization, something you do with your family. So think beyond just traditional activities. Also, be specific and data-driven. If you have a fundraiser, don't just say, had a fundraiser to raise money for cancer. Say, had a fundraiser, raised X amount of money for cancer research. I think that specificity and being data-driven and showing us numbers is really powerful in the process. And then for those of you, who are probably thinking, I can't even join an activity right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Everything is canceled. Don't worry. We know. There's going to be no expectation that during this pandemic that activities are going to look like they did before. If you have happened to pick up a hobby during, COVID, maybe you've, written poetry or I learned origami. If there's something you've done that just has been a hobby of yours, maybe that you've wanted to try or just ended up stumbling upon because you were really bored during quarantine and deep in the internet and found something you wanted to try, definitely tell us about that. That goes back to they don't always need to be traditional activities. If you have picked up a new role in your family, I talked to a student the other day who actually, her parents work all day and they're working remotely, but she has two younger brothers and she actually signs them into all of their Zoom classes while she's also in class every day because her parents can't step away from work. So that's something I'd want to know about on an application. I think, stepping up and taking on new responsibilities in your family during a really difficult time also speaks a lot to how you spend your time outside of the classroom and the type of person that you are. I'm going to show you some examples. So this is what I would say is the wrong way. And it's not necessarily bad. I mean, these are great activities, but you'll see the first one, ACAM Club. I've been an active member of the ACAM Club and I'm currently the CISSVP chair. Sounds great. I mean, it seems like this was really, this was something the student did in the summer, did pretty much, 6 weeks out of the summer. But I don't really know much more about it. I'm curious. Tell me more. Then we have Meals on Wheels. Meals on Wheels is very important to my heart, and I love getting to deliver food to the needy. This is great. The student did this, for 2 years. I love to see that, but I think there could be more detail there. And then the same with this last one. The student has also pretty much held a job for most of high school, and as a, working at a restaurant as a busboy. So if we take this, these 3 activities and kind of just upgrade them a little bit, we get to this. Activities: Academy of Creative Arts and Music Club, founding member for 4 years, and I'm currently the chair of a yearly talent show review. All of a sudden, that activity makes sense. I get it. That's really cool. Meals on Wheels, and this is where we get to the data-driven piece. I have collected 6,500 meals in my time there and raised $15,000 for the cause. I increased the club from 4 to 44 members, pulled out some really impressive things and put them on paper. We love to see that. And then busboy. I've worked as a local restaurant as a busboy to save money for college. I work year-round cleaning tables and interacting with customers. So, be specific, give details, give yourself credit for what you've spent time doing. Make sure we know it. That's what we love to see. And I feel like, and I hope you feel like it too, I already feel like I know the students so much more from this set of activities and how they've spent their time. The essay, the somewhat, I think, dreaded college essay. I know the essay is definitely a stress point. We actually recently did a poll during one of our sessions that we had at NYU, asking people what they were most stressed about with the college process, and the essay was like by far the first thing. Please don't stress about it too much. This is meant to be a personal reflective essay. It's about you. And, it's about picking a topic you love and just writing about it. It's not about necessarily coming up with a topic that's never been written about before. And that's super important. I think there is this pressure to write an essay that is a brand new topic. It's probably not going to happen, and that's okay. It's totally fine. Because it really isn't about coming up with a new topic. It's about showing who you are as it relates to the topic. And when you're writing about you and who you are and what you stand for, that is when your personality comes across. That's when it doesn't matter the topic. I'm just getting to know you and something that you care about. So that's super important. This essay is about you. I always like to say too that it is good when you are sitting down to write that essay to try to think about sharing something with an admissions committee that they really don't learn about you elsewhere in an application. Definitely don't use your essay to be, a repeat of your extracurricular activities. Use it to be, something where we can learn something new about you, something about who you are and what you stand for. I think it just adds a really nice level of depth to your application. Simpler is better. Again, it does not have to be a life-changing topic. I read an essay the other week that was a student actually wrote about what is on her bulletin board in her room and how it sits right above her computer. And, when she's on her computer and she looks up, she kind of talked through some of the items on her bulletin board and why they're important to her and how they've shaped her. Pretty simple. And she said she literally came up with the idea because she was sitting down to work on her essay and she was staring at the bulletin board and she thought, I want to write about this. Why not? There's some cool things on here, some things I've done, some things that are really important to me, and ended up writing a great essay about just a few different things on her bulletin board that kind of stood for who she was. We do want to hear your voice. It's super important. And the essay is definitely something that, you're going to want someone to read over. You're definitely going to want people to weigh in on. You're going to want someone to help you proofread it, because oftentimes we read what we think we wrote instead of what we actually wrote. So we want it to be well put together and, no grammar or spelling issues. So you're definitely going to, need some support on this and have someone you trust kind of weigh in, but make sure your voice maintains. I'll tell you a story. So I read an essay 2 years ago, and it started with the word Jeepers, exclamation point. And I kept reading it, and it was so clear that a 40-year-old woman had written that essay, that it was not the voice. I've never heard a 17-year-old say Jeepers in the context, especially in the context in which it was used. So, we want to hear your voice. We want to hear who you are, what you're all about. So even though you'll want someone to weigh in on it and maybe get a second opinion, make sure your voice maintains. Remember, this is not an essay for English class. This isn't your typical 5-paragraph intro, 3-paragraph body, conclusion essay. This is your essay to write about you and something you care about. If it makes sense to do that in 8 paragraphs, go for it. If it makes sense to have 2 paragraphs, go, you know, the format is yours. If you feel like you need to include a little dialogue, that's fine. If there's a place where it makes sense to have a list, that's fine. There's complete creative control here for you to write an essay that is you. So don't feel like you have to follow any sort of format. And then the most important thing is to be reflective. This is a time for you to reflect. So if you're telling a story, make sure you reflect on it. Make sure you tell that story and then tell us why it's important. Because you really want this to be an essay that reflects on something that really helps us understand you, your character, what you stand for, and who you would be on our college campus. And you don't have to be that direct. You don't have to say, I wrote this because this is who I would be on your college campus. But if you write an essay about, you know, who you are, what you stand for, something you love, your character is going to come across very naturally. So these are kind of my, this is just a list of do's and don'ts. You know, what we do want to see, and this is some of the stuff I've talked about, but we want to see passion. We want to hear your genuine voice, right? That goes back to what I talked about in the beginning, being authentic in your application. We want to see, you know, introspection and creativity, thoughtfulness, you know, all of these kind of, you know, I know that that might seem somewhat vague, but we really are just looking for your voice to come across, right? We want you to really think and reflect, kind of going back to that reflection, that introspection on why you're telling us the story or you're talking about what you're talking about, and think about what you really want us to get out of it. When I meet with students and get to read their essays at times, I often ask them, what do you want me to learn? I read it and then I say, here's what I learned about you through this essay. What did you want me to learn about you through this essay? So you can always challenge someone to do that. Have someone read your essay and then tell them what they learned about you, and then make sure it matches what you want them to learn about you. What we definitely don't want to see, like I said, the point of view of someone else. We want it to be your true, authentic voice. You should write about what you want to write about and what's important to you, not what others think you should write about. And that's kind of a good piece of advice for the whole application process, I think. This is your process. Your fit for a college is going to be really personal. It might not be the same as your best friend's fit. Your essay certainly won't be the same as, you know, your best friend's. So definitely this is something that is a little bit more personal and based on you and who you are. Don't feel like you need to use a lot of fancy words. That thesaurus language, we can see it from a mile away. We read essays for a living. I can tell a thesaurus essay versus just a genuine essay. Again, we're not looking for you to be able to write a thesis here. This isn't an official paper for school. This is a chance for your voice to come across. You want it to be clean. You want it to be well written, but this isn't, you know, some fancy paper that you hand in to earn your degree or anything like that. Also, you don't want to repurpose like a paper you've written for school. Like, oh, I read this great research paper. This should be about you, who you are, what you stand for. And then, you know, I also don't think, you know, I think for some students, you know, talking about COVID, there might be relevance there, but it certainly shouldn't be the only part of your essay. It definitely should be more reflective and reflecting who you are versus just talking about, you know, what the past 7 months have been like. We want you to dig a little deeper than that. If you do feel like there was something that happened during COVID, we'll talk about that in the additional information section, but there is another place in the application where you can capture that. So just really make sure it is reflective and that you are sharing some important qualities of your character with the admissions committee. Then we have the supplemental essays. You know, I think supplemental essays sometimes can kind of be brushed to the side because they're usually shorter than that personal statement, that main essay that you write. But truthfully, they are just as important as that essay. Typically, our supplemental essays are meant for us to get to know you even more. Some schools will just have like really fun supplemental essays. I saw one once that was like, name your top 5. That was it. You might be thinking, my top 5 what? They didn't say. You could name your top 5 anything and then explain why you chose those top 5. So, you know, sometimes they're really broad and look for a little creativity, look to learn a little bit more about who you are, what you're interested in. We used to have one at NYU. We don't have any, our supplemental essays a little bit more straightforward now, but years ago we had an essay that, you know, really was, it was just a question that said, what did you do last Sunday? And we gave students, you know, like 300 words to tell us what they did last Sunday. And it was just a way to learn a little bit more about a student, learn a little bit more about who they were, what they stood for. So I think definitely, you know, for students, you know, be creative with those types of questions. We actually ended up taking that question off because students were saying, oh, it's so funny you asked. I was in Guatemala doing missionary work. I got back in time for class on Monday. And we were like, I don't know that that's true. So we took that question out. But, you know, those fun questions, they're meant for you to have fun with. I know writing an essay isn't always fun, but that's what they're there for, and just helps the admission committee learn a little bit more about you. The most common supplemental essay that you will see is a question where we ask, why NYU? Why USC? Why Tulane? You know, where we're asking you, why are you applying to our school? And it's your chance to put in writing why you think our school is a good fit for you. And, you know, those why insert college name questions really are a way for you to show demonstrated interest in a school. Some schools will track demonstrated interest and will track how many times you contact them. And we'll talk a little bit about that in engaging with an admissions office in a few minutes. But, you know, all schools will, if they have a question like that, this is the place they're going to understand why you're a good fit for their school. So in these questions, you definitely want to dig a little bit deeper. You know, you don't just want to say, oh, I want to go to NYU because it's in New York City. There's a lot of schools in New York City. What is it specifically about NYU in New York City that interests you? So you definitely want to dig deep. You want to really write out the reasons you're applying to that school. Maybe location can certainly be one of them, but you know, is it a specific major? Is it a specific club? Is it a specific teacher you've read about, maybe seen on the news? You know, tell us all of those things. Give us examples of what is it about the school that really are resonating with you. So dig a little deeper. Keep it, you know, you want to dig deep into why that college. You don't need to like recite facts or anything. You know, you don't need to say, oh, well, you know, have 15 study abroad sites around the world. You can just say like, I've always wanted to study abroad. You know, I've, you know, really wanted to go to this country and you offer this, and, you know, you don't have to like restate facts, but you want to dig a little deeper. Love it when students holler at their hookups. You know, if you you decide to apply to NYU and you say, I met Maggie at this presentation and she was great. Love to see it. But also just, you know, if you had a really positive, I mean that jokingly, kind of, but if you had a positive interaction with someone from that school, a student, a faculty member, a staff member, and that has influenced you to apply to that school, that's great. Let us know. We love to hear that. I love when students, you know, do get to visit our school, or even students now who are, we give students the opportunity to email with a current student, and students that are saying, I got to email with Sarah and she was so nice and she explained so much to me and she told me I could study this, and so that's definitely what encouraged me to apply, you know. So I think, you know, really thinking about if there are any personal connections that you've had, we love to hear it. That's a great way to show that you're, you know, a good fit for the school. And just this last bullet, they're never optional. If a college says you can write an optional, why are you applying to this college statement, write it. It is not optional. Most parts of the college admissions process, if it says optional, it truly is, like test optional. Supplemental essays are never optional. My advice, always fill them out. It can never hurt you. It can only help you. And then the final part of the application before we kind of transition to just talking about how to engage with an admissions office is this additional information section. It's a part of the common application. Most applications will have a place for you to include additional information. Now, this is a truly optional part of the application. If you feel like you've told us everything you need to know, that's fine with us. That's absolutely fine. You don't need to use this, but if there's something you feel like is important to know about you and you feel like you need to include it in the additional information section, absolutely fine. Maybe you had a really tough teacher and you really struggled in pre-calculus, and you think you could have done better and you're not really proud of the grade, but you worked as hard as you could and you just want to let us know. This is where you do it. Maybe if you had a family circumstance happen one semester and you had a few weaker grades because you were just going through a lot, this is where you'd want to mention it. And so this is definitely a place to explain. Don't complain. I don't love reading additional information where you blame a bad grade all on your teacher, but it is a place for you to kind of let us know what's going on. Here's the context. Here's what's happening. Here's what happened in my life, and it is a place for you to just share those things. Maybe you don't want to write your full essay about it. So you do have this additional kind of part in the application that you can use if you need to. This year, there is also an additional, if you've been affected by COVID or natural disasters. I know in California, there have been severe wildfires all the way up through the Pacific Northwest. So there's also a question where you can kind of talk about any extenuating circumstances. It's not, it really is just for you if you feel like there's something the committee needs to know. So don't feel compelled to fill it out. You don't need to write an additional essay or anything. Certainly don't need to sneak one in. It's really just a place that you can say, they didn't learn this about me. I want to share it in the additional information. And so the final piece of this is just thinking about how to engage with admissions offices. So we talked through all of the different parts of the applications, but as you're kind of going through your search process, how do you reach out to admissions office? How do you communicate with them? And so, there's a few different ways that you can do this. Some schools do track this thing called demonstrated interest. Demonstrated interest is the amount of times in a lot of ways that you have interacted with a college. Now, this doesn't mean emailing them every day, attending every virtual campus tour, going to every session. Demonstrated interest is just more about meaningful connection, attending an info session. If a school is having a session at your high school, going to that session. It's not a quantity thing. It is more of a quality thing. So let's say, a college is looking at 2 applications and they realize that, they're very similar. They're kind of between the 2 students, and they're there and they're thinking, who do we admit? And then they realize that one of the students had done a virtual information session and a college fair. And then the other student they had never heard of this student before they even applied. They had never even reached out to them. Who do you think they're going to admit, right? They're going to admit the student that's reached out, that has engaged with them. So it's not about doing a million things. It's not about, reaching out constantly. It is more about, just showing some interest, attending that info session. That's kind of all that you need to do there. Some schools will allow you to apply. I have early decision, that's what ED stands for. Some schools will allow you to apply early action, and then all schools have a regular decision applicant pool. So early decision is that application process where you have identified your number 1 school, your top school. And you want to apply there because it's your number 1 school. And you are essentially saying to the school when you apply, this is my number 1 school. If I apply, I am coming. And so it's binding. We say it's a binding process because you're kind of committing to the school when you submit that application. Then there's early action. Early action is submitting that application early, saying this is definitely a top choice, but you're not bound to attend. You don't have to attend if you're admitted. You can still keep applying to colleges. You can make your decision, later on if you want to keep applying to schools, but it does allow you to get a decision early from that school. And then regular decision is when you apply, when all students apply and receive, your decision. Typically regular decisions are received in March. So you can decide what's best for you. I will say kind of this idea of demonstrating interest, applying early decision or early action is another way to do that, to say this is one of my top schools. I'm really interested in it. We talked about ways to show interest, virtual visits, regional events, when campuses are open, if you have the opportunity to visit those campuses. But very often, colleges will come to you. I come to LA every fall and go all over LA and have events all over LA to meet students. So there's, our NYU does that around the world. We have people that go to China. We have people that go to Illinois. We have people that go to Texas. And so we divide and conquer around the world to meet students. So even if you can't get to a certain college campus, there's a good chance they'll come to you and you can meet them in your local city. I'll talk a little bit about interviews and communicating with an admissions counselor as well. But before I do, I want to say if you do have the opportunity to do a campus visit, definitely take the tour, definitely do the info session, super important. But then when you're done, eavesdrop on campus, walk around, look to see if what they told you in the tour lives up to what you see happening on campus, right? They say students are really engaged, you're always hanging out on campus, and you walk around, are there kids hanging out on campus? What are they doing, So definitely is a great way to get that feel of campus. But in this virtual world, you can kind of do this virtually too. You can certainly attend that virtual information session, but then you can also follow those schools on social media. You can Google those schools on social media. You can, find some ways to still learn about the school, even if you're not there. So definitely recommend doing that. I know you're all internet sleuths. You can go on and find some ways to learn about the school, find some students that go there, follow them. Most of our student ambassadors post on social media, and they do takeovers on our social media. So you can still have that eavesdroppy way in a virtual world to get a feel for campus. And I definitely encourage you to do the official stuff, do the official tour, do the official, information session, but then also, kind of go out on your own and learn a little bit more and make sure the two kind of match. Interviews. Some of you might have the option to do an interview. I like to call them slightly formal conversations because they are not supposed to be scary. They're not supposed to be nerve-wracking. They really are just supposed to be a way for not only that college to get to know you, but for you to get to know that college. You want to also use an interview to make sure it's a good fit for you. Also, it's really important as you go into an interview to know what type of interview it is. Some interviews are just informational. It's just a way for you to sit down with an alum or a student and just learn more. You can pick their brains. It's not going to be used in the review of your application. But many schools will do evaluative interviews, which does mean that you are, it is a part of your application. They're going to take notes and put a write-up in your file so that the committee can consider it. So it's important to know what type of interview you're walking into. You also want to know who you're interviewing with, because you're definitely going to want to ask that person questions. So it's great to know, am I interviewing with an admissions counselor, an alumni, a student? And you might tailor your questions a little bit different. If you're talking to a student, you're definitely going to want to ask about their experiences on campus. Same with an alum. Whereas an admissions counselor, your questions might be more about the type of students on campus and how they spend their time. So, make sure you know who's interviewing you so your questions are appropriate. And then know that interviews can happen in a lot of ways. I would imagine for the next year, maybe even two, most of them will be virtual. But some schools do interviews locally. They might come to where you live and do an interview. They might do an interview day at a local hotel, and you'll meet them in the lobby and do informal interviews there. They might come to your high school and do an interview. You can also do interviews on campus very often. Not all schools offer interviews, but it's definitely a good question to ask the schools that you're applying to if they do, so you can decide if it's a good fit for you. And then the final piece, communicating via email, especially in this virtual world that we live in. I do think, kind of thinking about, should I reach out? I have a question. When do I reach out? What do I say? All of those questions I absolutely understand. I'll give you some of the examples of things you definitely shouldn't do, and then I will talk about some ways you can reach out. So these are just some sample emails. I've marked out all of the important information, but I'll read you this first one. Dear Maggie, I have a few questions about your school. Can you tell me the impressions? Overall, does it have a good environment? Do students have a good experience? I mean, it's super vague, right? Sitting down to answer an email like this, I don't even know what you're interested in. I wouldn't even really know where to start. So you definitely want to be more specific in your emails. The next one we'll call the Haster. Hello from California. My name is, and I'm a senior. I want to let you know I'm really interested, and it's defiantly a school I will be applying to, an early action round. And so you want to proofread. These are formal emails. They are not text messages. Pretty sure that student met definitely, not defiantly. You know, it doesn't have to be a paper for class, but you should address the person you're emailing. You should use capitalization and punctuation, you know, and really make sure that you're proud of the email that you're sending. This could end up being a part of your file when you apply. So you definitely want to make sure you are putting in writing and presenting that, you know, that side of yourself you're really proud of about, and that it's polished. These are my final two examples. You know, we met last week. I was really impressed. I love your school. It was so great to be there. We call this one the imbiber because there's not actually even really a question. And that's okay. It's not that that's a bad thing, but I think a lot of times, you know, you don't have to reach out to just reach out. There can be a reason why you're reaching out. And it's not that we don't love to hear from students, but it also just doesn't need to be done. And then the last one, the over asker. Hi, my name is, I'm a junior. And then a list of 20 questions, and it goes on. The page cuts it off here. Definitely would recommend, if you do have this many questions, attend an info session. And then if you still have this many questions, probably best to arrange a phone call. Most offices have just hotlines you can call, but probably best to kind of arrange a more formal phone call so that you can kind of talk through these questions. Some of these questions could be hard to just answer in email. And so, you know, good questions are the ones that are specific, but also open-ended. What kind of support do you provide students? You know, how does the academic advising look? What kind of student fits in at your school? What are some of your students' favorite classes? Questions like, do you have study abroad? How's your math major? Those are very like, there's not much, you know, do you have study abroad? Yes. You know, how's your math major? It's great. You know, you want to ask questions that are a little bit more thought-provoking, that really help get to what means a lot to you about your college experience. So I'm going to open it up for questions, but you know, this is going to be challenging. Please have fun with it. This journey is your own. It is a personalized journey. It is a way for you to, you know, think about what you're looking for in a college, and go follow that. Go find that. There's 4,000 colleges out there. There's one that's good for you. Be open to a wide range of schools. Really keep an open mind. You know, trust the counselors and the people you have in your life who are helping you through this process. I love finding a college free time. I think college can consume us, but if you can find a time, you know, if it's the weekend or dinner time that you just don't think about colleges, that will definitely help your mental health. And so all of that I think is really important. Be careful with your social media accounts. It's not that schools check it, but you just don't want, unfortunately, you know, we do live in an age where social media is everywhere, and you just want to make sure your application and who you are and who you're presenting to the world really is your best self and your best self put forward. So definitely think about that. And then my final advice is there's no bad schools, only bad fits. There's so many great schools out there. Think about the school that's a good fit for you. You know, those schools that really meet your interest in who you are, and allow them to apply to those schools and have a really successful college career.
Thank you
so
much, Maggie. There was so much information packed into this 15-minute presentation. Oh my gosh, students, are you excited? I'm excited. I want to go apply to NYU myself. We do have a couple questions. Before I get to the question, the survey code, students, is selective for this workshop. So tonight, after the closing session, we'll send you your survey. You'll be entered into the drawing for the 5 scholarships that we'll be giving out, and laptops. We're giving out laptops tonight as well. So go ahead and write down selective as your survey code for this workshop. All right, Maggie, we have a question around dual enrollment. So are dual enrollment courses viewed the same as APs regarding rigor?
Yes, I would say they definitely are. We kind of consider dual enrollment, APs, IBs to all be like a college level class. So yes.
Great. And then a follow-up question, is it better to take an AP course to get an A to help your GPA, or a community college course to get the A where it's not weighted on your GPA?
I would say, to be truly honest, either one is fine. I will tell you, you know, because every high school does GPA a little bit differently. There are schools that don't weight APs at all. There's schools that give a third of a point for an AP. There's schools that give a full point. So, you know, do what's best for you. It really is not going to have a difference in how we review an application, since GPAs are so different school to school. We're just going to look more at the rigor and how you've challenged yourself than that actual number.
Great. And what are some suggestions you would give to student athletes?
Yes, student athletes. So I think student athletes, I mean, definitely very much if you want to play that sport at the college, you should get in touch with coaches as soon as possible. There's colleges that have all different divisions, Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, but you can reach out to coaches at all schools and figure out how to start the process if you would like to play a sport at that school. And so I definitely recommend that, and those coaches will help you through the application process as you're applying to that school, so they can definitely be a resource for you. But don't wait for them to find you. If you really want to play a sport and you want that school to know about the sport that you play, reach out. And then, really on most college campuses that do have athletics, there is additional support for athletes when they get there. And it is, a great way to find community, I think, on a college campus as well.
Great. And one last question before I get to the question, we are giving away, since it's our final day for Destination College, we are giving away a $50 gift card at every single workshop tonight. And so tonight's lucky winner is Vanessa Huaman. Congratulations, Vanessa. You will receive an email for us for a $50 gift card to Target or Amazon, your choice. All right. And then last question is, if I got a B in a college course and it brought down my GPA, would that look less favorably on my application?
A B is really not going, one B is not going to change a decision. We look at so many things. Trust me, not everyone that's admitted to our school is a straight A student. That would be literally, no one's perfect. So don't stress about it too much. That would be my biggest advice.
Great.
And what's done is done. Also there's points in this process where there's things you control and things you can't control. We can't control the pandemic, right? We can't control virtual learning, and we can't control activities being canceled, but we can put together essays that really represent who we are. We can think about how we're, writing about the schools in those supplemental essays. So definitely put your effort in the things you can control, not something that's in the past that you can't control at this point.